So Hans Hickler, welcome to the Science of Us.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Excellent. I'm excited too. And I mean, full disclaimer that you are my mentor, someone I look up to a lot, and I'm very pleased to be able to have a longer conversation with you about all of your experience and a little bit about human behavior as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Sort of like what we talk about when we chat on WhatsApp then, huh?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Good.
Now, I'll start with you've had an extensive career. You've been in the world of logistics, quite a lot of that. You now find yourself in consulting to a range of venture capital firms, startups, C suite executives, and so on. But let's maybe start back at logistics. What was that world like? How many roles were you in? How long were you in that world for?
Boy, I think I was in that space about 25 years. So right out of college in 1984 until 2012, I guess. So worked for three different multinational companies. One was a container shipping company. I started as a management trainee, American President Lines, and rode that wave for 20 some years and ended up being the CEO of APL Logistics. And then did 4 or 5 years at DHL and finished in Asia again for a company called Agility Logistics. So all big multinational logistics companies, ocean, express, forwarding. So, those of us in this business think it's the sexiest business alive, but nobody else does.
And interestingly, now you find yourself as the owner of your own consultancy, and you're probably working with a number of different people for, I guess, looking at logistics world being quite old world, but now you're in a space where you're talking to some startups, people doing some really exciting things. Not to say that logistics isn't exciting and sexy, as you said, because I also find that sexiness about it.
Awesome.
Having some family members involved in it as well. How did you find yourself as the owner of your own consultancy? What led you to leave logistics? Or I know you're still slightly involved in logistics, obviously through some of your work, but what led you to leave the C-suite yourself to actually start your own consultancy?
It was sort of a conflagration of things. I'd like to say that, I was sort of reinventing myself and going into the next stage of my life, but I was given a pretty big shove. I had some health issues that basically I'd broken my neck many years earlier, and there was something reoccurring there. And basically, I couldn't be on a plane 220 days a year anymore. And so, running a global logistics company, you're visiting, God knows how many countries every year and in front of customers. And I just couldn't do that anymore from a health standpoint. So I came back from Asia to here to Florida and didn't really know what I wanted to do. And all of a sudden my network started pinging me and said, "Hey, can you help me with this? And can you work with some of my CEOs and help them do what you did?" And out of that, by osmosis, came this business that I have, where I'm a
That's
bit of a
that's
thought
amazing.
sparring partner for CEOs.
That's amazing. And you mentioned you broke your neck. How did you do that?
I was skiing, so I'm an avid skier, and I was cliff jumping, and I was sort of on the third jump of the morning with my son, and it was sort of like, I don't know, maybe a 10-meter jump off a cliff over this cat track into the powder, and it was my third jump, except this time I hit a rock just before I launched, and I launched, but my skis stayed up there, so ended up breaking my neck, and well, the rest is history.
Wow. I guess very lucky not to do anything really serious. I mean, you're still here. Yeah, you couldn't get on a plane and you now look like you've recovered. What
Yeah.
was the recovery like to get through from a pretty serious injury like that?
It was pretty amazing. I skied for another half hour, and all of a
Wow.
sudden I couldn't feel my arm anymore, and went to the first aid station and told them I can't feel my arm. They said, "Oh, you've broken your neck. It's the nerve between C3 and C4, and that controls the right arm." They knew exactly what happened, and I went in for an operation, and the doctor said, "Listen, the best case scenario after this operation is that you're going to need like 2 years of therapy because you're going to come out of this surgery and your arm's still going to be like a noodle." And I came out of surgery and I had my arm back. I never did one day of therapy, and it was a miracle. I had an amazing doctor in California, and then that was in 2004, and then in 2011 I started getting these horrible headaches, and a nerve was pinching. I have a metal plate in my neck, and right above the plate, a nerve was starting to pinch and starting to create a bit of problems. So So anyway, that was sort of the impetus. And I took that opportunity to do a whole bunch of things with my life. I wrote a couple of books. I started seriously meditating. I decided I wanted to spend 20% of my time helping social entrepreneurs, and sort of decided that, and then that was all before the business thing started to happen. And out of that came sort of this new lifestyle where I just try to spend a little bit more time thinking about what's important to me and how to translate that into helping others.
Brilliant. I think something that a lot of people can live by. And if we do come back to Ellipsis Advisors, your company now, so what type of companies are you working with? You've mentioned social enterprise there. What are some of the other customers that you work with at the moment?
Yeah,
And
look, I
why?
have, I'm a one-man show, and I don't call myself a consultant, really. I call myself, or a coach. I call myself a thought sparring partner, because coaches have tools and they use those tools to get their clients to evolve, I guess. I don't have tools, right? I never trained to be a coach. What I am is a guy who's been in the CEO seat for many years in several companies. And so my clients are high performing CEOs that value thought partnership. And they put me on retainer, and literally we have conversations. And at some point I flip a switch and I put myself in their seat and I say, I'm thinking these three things, or I'm thinking about it this way. And we all grow up with a different experience base on a different track. And so I try to sort of provide a perspective, sort of a bit of a forest view instead of the tree view, and bring my experience to bear. So I have about 10 clients that are mid and large cap CEOs. And then I have about 8 startups. I've been a seed early stage investor for many years, sort of progressed that into sort of A and B round type. But I have about 8 startups that I advise. And then I have, over the years, I've had numerous social entrepreneurs that I support through an organization called Ashoka. And I've gone pretty deep with 2 of them that I've been with for a long time. So
That's good.
the big companies are my paycheck. The startups are my 401k plan, and the social entrepreneurs are the love and joy of my life that I do to make me a better person and feel better about being able to
Unreal.
contribute.
Love how you've segmented it like that. I think that it sounds like a dream for a lot of people as well. um, And if you look at the position that you're in now, so you've worked with a lot of different companies, you've been in a lot of different environments, you're probably in a position where you can take a broader view and compare a lot of different personalities that you've actually worked with. So, what have you learned about human behavior, if we get into that, across all of the different people, all the different problems and challenges, the opportunities that you've seen?
Well, when I look at leaders, uh, and frankly, let's start with leaders. You know, leaders are a manifestation of their experience and their skills and their style. And I always said, look, if I'm leading somebody, I'm willing to invest until they have experience. I'm willing to invest in their skill set. But when it comes to style, I always had a very short rope when I was a leader, because if you come into my door and I give you feedback and say, respect for the individual is something that I cherish, and it's a non-negotiable for me. When you walk out the door of my office, you can make a decision right there. I'm going to change my behavior, or I'm not going to change my behavior. And if you don't change your behavior, you're probably looking for another job because you don't want to work for Hans, because that's something that Hans holds as a non-negotiable. And so I think all of us are an amalgamation of our experience, our skills, and our style, and that then manifests itself in our behavior. And so I always look at, when I'm dealing with people, when I deal with you, I immediately think about your style, my assessment of your style. I've done a lot of work on what my style is, and I adjust myself to you. And I try to be very present to make sure that our styles connect where they can in the best possible way, and that we can achieve whatever objective is we're trying to achieve. And that's sort of the underpinning of that. Now, when I work with CEOs, there's this track thing that happens. You have a highly successful CEO that grew up in the sales track, for example, or maybe it was sales and something else. And so what I find is that people make decisions and act quicker and more deliberately when they are in the comfort zone of their track. So me, for example, sales and operations and logistics, finance was not my thing. So I always made sure I had a really good finance manager with me that could understand a balance sheet 10 times better than me. But what happens is if there's a sales situation that I as a CEO am dealing with or an operations issue, I've got a lot of experience. I've got a lot of confidence in that. I'll make that decision quicker. But there's a whole bunch of tracks that I'm not as comfortable with where I know the right answer. I know the right answer. But when I'm working with my client, I'm the one pushing and saying, look, you've already told me what the answer is. What's stopping you from pulling the trigger on the situation? And it's because we don't, it's when we don't have that comfort factor, then we say, oh, well, if that person leaves and I don't have someone to fill it, then the job will be vacant and, my plan will suffer. Well, it'll probably suffer a lot more if you've got the wrong person in the job. And so, I always work with my clients around them understanding having their self-awareness, not only about the values and who they are, but also their experience, their skill set, their style. Because we always have to round that out with the people and the teams that we surround ourselves with. Experience, skills, and style. The constant is who I am as a leader and how I want to lead you. The rest is the formula is always the same. I can't do it by myself. I need a good team. I need to understand, when I'm hiring a team member, I'm not just hiring, a senior vice president of sales. That's their functional job. But they have another job, another hat they wear, which is they're part of my management team. And so then I have to think, how's the makeup of my management team? Are we heavy on the aggressive side and less on the introspective side? Well, then I'm going to hire a sales manager that also balances makes the team better. The functional stuff is chips to get in the game. For me, it's all about how do we become high performing.
And I
Does that make
think,
sense?
yeah, I wanted to go a little bit down that path of the self-awareness because when you talk about it, I think it's fantastic because you clearly do have that greater understanding of your own self, your style, the things that motivate you, the things that don't. That is such a true core foundation to how people can then branch out. And we've talked about it a little bit on the show before with Katerina, our neuroscientist, also with another expert, Rachel Green from the Emotional Intelligence Institute. And I think what we have seen there is that if you can have that greater understanding of yourself, the opportunities are almost limitless because you can adapt your style, you can get on with people better. But how many people from who you've worked with, it does seem to be this skill that is quite difficult to attain for a lot of people. So how many people have you actually seen achieve this? Not just your clients, but all of the other people that you've worked with in your career?
Well, I think, look, I'm a meditator. So first of all, meditation is one of the ways to sort of reboot your brain waves, right? And your brain needs rebooting because it's getting all these inputs. So if you can't calm yourself down, then you can't really be introspective. So some people do that by walking around the lake. I do it by meditating. But I talk a lot to my clients about the way I tee it up is what's important to you? That question of what is important to you, not in the business, but you as a person. And people open up about that. They talk about, well, what's important to me is helping out in the community, or, I like to travel, or I like to meet different cultures, or friendship, or community, my church. People start to talk. But for some reason, the minute they leave the door and go to work, that part of them very often is put on a shelf until they come back home. And so the work that I do is, okay, all those things that are important to you, in order for 100% of you to show up at work, that has to stay there. And very often that means you're going to have to be a little vulnerable. You're going to have to tell your team or your organization what you're passionate about, or what's worrying you, or what you feel you're not good at, what you're losing sleep about. Because exactly those things, those vulnerable, transparent moments of honesty is what triggers the same transparency back to you from your team member, from your organization, from your family,
Yeah.
right? So if you want a high-performing team, then you have to be honest and open and vulnerable. You can't leave half of yourself at home and bring in the part that, only talks about, quarterly results and the shareholder investors and everything else. So, if starting schools for kids or for girls is important to you in your home life, then how can you bring that to the organization? So, in Asia, I did that. I told my team, listen, one of the things you're going to learn about me is that I love social entrepreneurship. I believe in social entrepreneurship, and it my passion is in health and children in social entrepreneurship. So I want to do something for children, and I want to build some schools in the countries we serve. And what starts to happen, all of our country managers want to do things for their communities because their employees live in their communities. Now, I made the choice that we're going to build some schools because that's my passion, and that's where the non-financial results of my company were going to come from. But my country manager or my manager of Southeast Asia, if they have a different passion, they can implement that. What's important to me is that we bring our passion to the table and that we're not just this sort of rigorous business person, you know?
Yeah. And coming maybe back to that point that you were making at the start, when people don't bring their true self and show their true personality, why? I mean, why do they do that? Why is it that they do segment it? And we say that we've got a different persona for work, we've got a different persona for home. I've noticed it with a lot of the friends that I have. I've even noticed it with myself at times when I'll be a certain person that I'll walk into, and it'll also be contextual to whoever might be in the room. So for some colleagues, I'll be a lot more relaxed. For other colleagues, I'll be a bit more guarded. And I suppose what this is getting to is the whole notion of walls and why we put up walls. But maybe before we get to that wall, and maybe it's all related, but why do you feel that people don't show their true personality when they're in those work situations?
Well, I think it's sort of a defense mechanism of prioritization, right? So I come into work, I have very quantitative objectives, and I'm going to be very A, B, C, who, what, when oriented. And the more authoritative I am about that, then that's my translation of this is how we're going to get things done in the most efficient way. But the reality of that, and there's some of that's required, right? Some of the stuff we learn at work that we're passionate about and that works at work, we need to bring outside of work too. So it works both ways, but it can't be pieces, right? And so I think what we try to do is we just have so much pressure at work or in other facets of our life that we compartmentalize. You and I have had this discussion. I talk about blinders, right? And racehorse has these blinders so that they are focused on the track and don't see the other stuff. That's a natural defense mechanism for us. There is so much crazy stuff going on that if I don't focus on the track that I'm on now, and at work it's one track and at home it might be another, then I'm not going to get anything done. But the price I pay for that is that I don't open up all the other inputs and resources and perspectives that at the end of the day are going to be hugely valuable for me. And so I only see the track, right? And so for me, Derek Jensen, who's this author, he's an environmental activist. He's an amazing author. He talks about sort of the sociological, demographic, environmental roots of what's happening to our planet and what's happening to us as a civilization. And he talks about this concept of blinders, and it's a coping mechanism. We want to be a bystander because by being a bystander, we don't have to involve ourselves in all of these things. But the price he says sometimes you just got to throw a grenade in the room, right, to make change. And so for me, it's this important aspect of understanding yourself, of really sitting with yourself and saying, what makes me tick? How am I the strongest and how am I the best person? And that's my obligation to hand to my organization, is the best of me.
And in many ways, I suppose it would be because what you talked about there about putting your blinders on, yes, it helps you increase focus, but if it is a lot about self-preservation, it's a very selfish, inward-looking mechanism, which is, very much built in from who we are. If you look back at all the emotions that we've still carried through and the development of the human brain. So if we're looking at that, what we're really asking ourselves here is how can we be less about ourselves, so less focused on what matters to us. And in a way, we're trying to learn and understand what matters to other people, but at the same time, we're trying to break it down and just say, it can't matter so much to me so that I can be more open and actually show more of myself. I don't know if that makes if that
Yeah,
makes
it
sense.
makes a lot of sense. It makes put another way, the more present I am with you, the more we're going to connect on the commonality that makes us high performing together, right?
Yeah.
So there's this great book called the Four Agreements about the four principles that the Mayan culture was built on. It was be impeccable with your word, and the word impeccable has the Latin, which means guilt. I think peccato is guilt. So be impeccable with your word is be very careful with the words you use because they have an impact, right? Don't take things personally. Whatever's coming at you, if you're screaming at me and calling me a son of a gun, it's you've got the problem, not me, right? Don't make assumptions. Be very sure that clarify understanding, because very often when we communicate, we've got so much garbage going on that we make assumptions about what we're hearing. And the fourth one is always do your best. And the best is not the same every day. But if I can go to bed at night saying I did my best, sometimes we're sick, sometimes we're not feeling well, sometimes we're tired. But if every day I do my best, and that doesn't mean I have to be running 125% every day, but I want to do my best. And my best comes from when I'm at my best in here as well. When I'm introspective, I know what my goals are, I know how I want to achieve those goals, and I can be present with the people, with my team, with my organization, and connect with them on those things.
The notion of being present, because I wonder how much of this stems from the ability to actually stay in the moment that we're in, as opposed to being distracted by my phone that just went off with a notification, whatever else it might be. Is this notion of being present actually one of the core fundamentals to how you can do all these other things? Because without being present, you lack the ability to hear things and miss cues. Would that be correct?
Totally. Look, if I'm completely present with you and we have a 10-minute conversation, that is much more productive than if we have a 45-minute meeting. We're constantly looking at our watch and looking at our iPhone, and I'm looking out my window in my office to see who else is waiting for me. And you notice that. So your reaction to me, the reason you came into my office is immediately impacted by that. And it feels somewhat counterintuitive to take the blinders off, right? Because when I'm present, I'm focusing on you,
Yeah.
right? But when I take my blinders off, I'm using the best of everything that's out there for me. I always tell people, opportunities aren't made. Opportunities are out there. We just don't see a lot of them because we're on this track, right? And so when I'm present with you, then I'm very focused. We're talking about what it is you're trying to get from me, what you're asking me, what you're the conversation we're trying to have, and it's a hell of a lot more productive. A hell of a lot more productive. And with meditating, you learn that, right? You learn how to slow yourself down to where you can sort of put all that stuff out a little bit. I wasn't always like this. When I first started this, my wife did tell me, she goes, it's really funny that you talk about sort of this being vulnerable at work, because I was the old school for a long time. um, but I think I always had this sense of being able to connect with people, and that's why I was in the sales side of things at first. But I think that's the important thing, is that if every interaction you have, if you can be present for that interaction, it's a gift. It's a gift to the person that you're interacting with, but it's also a gift to yourself.
I totally agree. One of the things I've been practicing recently is I've noticed since we've been doing the whole, working from home scenario in this crazy time, that I've been constantly look. I'm probably always addicted to my phone, as a caveat before I get into the next point. But what I've noticed is that I'm checking my phone a lot. Everything becomes grey, in the sense that you've got your kids running around. I've got a 3-year-old and a 10-month-old. My wife, thank heavens, is actually looking after them and being incredible. But what I've noticed is that when I spend time with them, I haven't been as connected with them because I've had my phone there. It's too easy. There's no separation. And one thing that my wife and I talked about the other day was, she put me up on it and said, "You're not being present. When you're with the kids, it's like, where is Tim? He's not here." And it was a wake up call for me. And it's only sort of in the last few days I've actually made a very, very conscious effort, and I leave the phone away. I commit fully to the space that I'm
I'm the
actually
same
in.
way.
And
I'm the same way.
look, yeah, it's
But
crazy.
see
The
what
conversations I
happens
have with
with
my phone, crazy.
self-awareness,
Yeah,
sometimes self-awareness needs a bit of a kick in the pants from our wife.
yeah,
But here's the deal. The minute you're self-aware that that is a behavior you don't want to do, and that's a behavior that doesn't allow you to be present, then you can take action against that, right? And so, I work a lot with my clients about self-awareness. It starts with observation, starts with a couple of questions, but very quickly we're talking about, there you go again. See, you're flying off the handle on an issue that's not even germane to any of your priorities. And once you can catch yourself doing that, um, it's easier. It's easier. But it starts with recognizing it in yourself.
totally. Well, I think this takes us on to a point that you raised before, but I think that I'd love to flesh out a little bit more, which is about this sense of vulnerability. Because if you inherently are not vulnerable, and if you do have your walls put up, you are not going to be self-aware because you're not willing to be accountable for things that you see about yourself that you don't like. So if we do think about vulnerability, how can we actually be more comfortable with that? I know we've touched on it a little bit, but what are some practical steps that you see people take that are really successful for people to then be more comfortable with that vulnerability?
Well, I think, like with anything, you start with some easy stuff, right? So I still remember the first time I came back from a trip to a board meeting. And, typical board meeting, you've sort of got three objectives, and I got killed on one of them. And my team and I had worked a lot on that. It was really important that I come back from this board meeting with the blessing to move forward on this stuff. It was important. And I screwed up. And for me, that was I'll never forget. It was the first time where I really practiced that. I went in and I just said, I just got the shit kicked out of me by the board, by the chairman. I screwed up. We were well prepared, and I screwed up. And it's going to cost us. It's going to cost us. We didn't get authorization to do whatever it was. And I don't even remember what it was, but I remember, and I think the old me would have gone in and said, hey, look, we asked for three things. I got two of them. We can rock and roll on the two. And I would have deflected on the other one, right? And celebrated the victory and said, we're good to go. But I didn't, because I was personally disappointed, and I knew it had a big impact. And so it always starts with you. You can never expect anybody to be vulnerable or transparent, unless you are. And I think, like anything with practice, you have to be deliberate until it becomes a habit. You have to say,
Totally.
I'm going to open up. I'm going to, tell my team that, death freaks me out. And we're going to have a conversation over wine, when we're all sitting there after a meeting and we're all having wine at the restaurant. I'm just going to throw something out there because I have to be deliberate about it. And then, next thing you know, oh yeah, me too. I got a 90-year-old dad, and then, it really worries me. And, and what happens is it breaks ice. When we breaks ice, breaks walls, right?
Totally.
So, I don't have to tell people everything about myself, but if I want their trust, if I want them to open up to me before, when the mountain is still a molehill, because this is what happens in business, is when you don't have a trusting team, I'm not going to share a problem when it's small. I'm going to try to solve it and nobody knows. But when it becomes big, and then they have to walk into Hans's door and say, Hans, we got a $2 million problem. And I'm sitting there going, why didn't I know about this before? Well, it's because they didn't, for some reason, my behavior stopped them from coming in my door and saying, hey, Hans, we've had two thefts in the Malaysia warehouse. It's a bit of a problem. I'll deal with it. And they didn't give me the opportunity to say, you know what? I've had that situation happen to me 5 times. You might want to think about A, B, C, and D. But no, and
Totally.
this is the trust, and this is the transparency that happens, that, little problems or little opportunities, little problems become big, and, little opportunities don't become big because we're trying to work it ourselves, or we don't have the trust that, holy shit, what if I fail, right?
Yeah.
And
And
so I
it's
think
so hard for
there's
people to let go of that. That's the problem. It's
yeah,
so hard to let go of that sense of control and say
yes,
something could reflect on me. in a particularly negative way. But as you said, you miss out on so much then.
Right, right. When we had a volcano, go off near the Philippines, and our container ships were covered in soot, and there's dangers of pirates boarding. The type A personality, my style, which is high aggressiveness and high urgency, very typical CEO profile, action oriented and urgent, would have said, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, and we'll meet in 3 hours and let's see what happens. But because I know that about myself, that our style comes out in moments of crisis, I've created process for myself that says I'm going to go around the table and ask anybody, everybody what they think, whether they've had experience. And lo and behold, two people on the team have had a similar experience and had connections with the Coast Guard or whatever it was. And all of a sudden the solution becomes easier and better. The problem becomes smaller. And,
So true.
and sometimes you just have to, and again, it's self-awareness. I know that about myself. I know how I act in moments of crisis, but I also know what I have to do about that so that I can get the best out of my team, right?
So that's
Or
an
my
interesting,
family members.
and that's an interesting point on crisis, because we are right now in an unprecedented crisis. I think that nobody has really seen. How have you seen a lot of what we talked about from this sort of sense of vulnerability? Have you seen things change with the unprecedented crisis that we're seeing and the shift in the way that we work? Have people changed the way they behave or not?
Um, well, look, like I said, in our styles come out. When things are great, I can say, oh, I can dial myself down, and I can ask Tim, hey, what do you think about that? And I can be very inclusive. But when there's crisis, so what I'm seeing with my clients is their styles are coming out, and because the world is changing for them every day, it's like lack of sleep, you know, people are sick, people are dying, can't pay the rent, and so we hunker down. We hunker down. And probably the best thing for us to do is just step back a little bit and rationally work the issues, right? But so I no, I'm not seeing a lot of change, but I think what I'm able to help people with is say, okay, let's what's the perspective? What do we have to do here? How do we chunk this thing down? Because most CEOs, they do that in their regular work. But in crisis, and they've got 15,000 different things working on, we have to prioritize, we have to chunk things down, we have to engage our team members, we have to do all those things. We can't break down all the processes we created because we've got the biggest crisis in the world. We might have some new processes we have to create, but the thing that has made us function is that it's most valuable when there's crisis.
A lot of what you talked about before, about sort of bringing your whole self to the table, about getting visibility, being very present. Now, we're doing this over video call. You're in Miami. I'm in Australia. So there's an obvious reason for that. But we have been forced to remove the physical and where you get all of these amazing verbal, audiovisual cues, etc., from the people that you're with, to now having to do a lot of stuff via video. When we go back and talk about how we break down walls, how we lower our walls, feel less awkward, be more vulnerable, do you find that over video and just over calls, is that part of everything you've talked about suffering as a result of it? Or is it just that we have to adapt our style to understand and look for different cues that we didn't see before?
Look, I'm a big believer in closeness, in proximity. The way I work with my clients, I like to be with them. I like to joke with their team members. I want to bring their team members in. I'm very tactile. And I typically, with my clients, I'll meet with them, let's call it once a month physically and twice or three times a month on video. This is really difficult for me because my product is that mix. And, for the first 3 or 4 weeks, the Zoom thing was fine with my clients because we're used to it. But now comes the time where, okay, this is where the Hans physical injection comes in, right? And I can't do it. And so I've had to adjust that. And so the way I try to do that is I try to have shorter, more frequent Zooms, so that, because the world's changing a lot. So, and I'm asking questions like, so, what's crazy today, or what are you working on today, and we're shifting into a much more immediate focus, and I'm trying to be present for them in the crisis of today. Whereas normally I'm a bit more longer thinking, okay, we've sort of got three things we're working on, and that stuff's all taken. So I'm having to adjust myself, and I'm having to sort of break some focus walls down and saying, okay, I'm just going to see what comes up at me, and I'm going to have two 20-minute conversations with Darren rather than one longer every other week one, because
Yep.
that's what he needs and that's what I need, because my ability to work with him is much more in the moment right now, right? So I think I think there's a lot of talk about look, this whole teledistance thing works. Yes, it does work. And I think what we're learning is it works really well for things that we thought it didn't work well for. But at the end of the day, that human interaction, that going to see the think of what I'm explaining to you is me with my customers, right? But think about sales. We still need to build relationships, and once the relationship's built, this is easier. But this whole idea of that I'm going to build new relationships in my business purely by calling up Tim and saying, hey, how you doing, let me tell you a little bit about my business, that
Yeah.
doesn't work. That
And
doesn't
I
work.
think
So
I think something we've talked about before is that the whole notion of social distancing is actually, it's not social distancing, it's physical distancing, because I've noticed myself, we're doing a pub trivia thing every Friday, and as someone with young kids who we never get to go out, we're suddenly on a call with 15 people, which we never would have done this every single week without a doubt.
never.
So it's I think it's something that we're actually very lucky, and we're finding that we're creating such stronger social bonds rather than actually distancing.
I think a lot of good things have come out of this thing. I have a client who does these birthday Zooms, at 5 p.m. and everybody's got a glass of wine. It's just a great, that's going to continue
Yeah.
no matter what happens. But I think, look, the most important thing for me is that we as individuals don't want to come across as insincere.
Yeah.
And very often we do, because we make these decisions to wall things off about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I know these last 3 or 4 weeks have taught me what works and what doesn't work relative to my style and how I need to connect with people. And I've had some pleasant surprises and I've had some not so pleasant surprises, but I'm digesting them. I think that's really what we need to do. I had this colleague, he was an amazing executive, but he was like a military, loved Winston Churchill. And when he came to work, man, he was pounding the table. And at home, in our social life, he was just the nicest, calmest, gentlest guy. And I finally said to him, listen, why is it that when you come to work, you feel that you need to pound the table and have this authoritarian style? And he goes, well, that always worked for me. I'm like, well, I think you're going to get a hell of a lot more out of it if you sort of loosen things up a little bit. And this is interesting. Certain styles don't work well at all in Zoom.
Yeah. And what would those styles be?
Well, I think people that are inherently introspective, they will sit back on Zoom. And the problem is you can't see their body language and draw them out, right? So when I have people on my team that tend not to be the first ones to speak up, I draw it out. Say, Karen, you haven't said anything about this, tell me about that. That's a lot harder to do, when you've got the Brady Bunch panel on Zoom and,
Totally.
and people are talking and they interrupt, the screen comes up and they're talking, and you can't orchestrate your team to get the most out of them sometimes, because
Yeah.
the A personalities do a lot better in Zoom than the non-A personalities.
Totally right.
So we have to find ways to adjust to the medium, right?
The other interesting thing that I'd noticed was when you go on, you assume every meeting is going to be a video meeting, and quite a few people just choose not to put the video on. So it's sort of like saying, if you draw the parallels with someone coming into the meeting room saying, actually, I'm just going to put a phone down, I'm going to go and sit outside, I don't really want to be here physically. And then it's even harder then, because you're like, what are they doing? Are they Are they actually not really listening to the conversation? How present are they? It starts to make you question a whole lots of
The
things. And
dynamics are crazy. I had a call like that today. The CEO was a board call. And, two people were already on when I came on and their video was off. And I said, I'm going to turn my video on. And when the meeting started, the CEO was talking to 6 blank screens, and I'm like giving him verbal cues. I'm doing thumbs up. I'm like trying to respond, because what the hell, you're doing a 2-hour, agenda, and you're not getting any visual cues. It's difficult. It's difficult. And that is exactly what we talk about when we put walls up, and when we try to sort of internalize what's happening. How easy is it to put a wall up then and say, you know what, they don't give a crap. I'm going to get through this as fast as I can, because I'm reacting. I'm going to go into my zone. I'm going to get this over with. Clearly, and they're all the wrong signals, but we see the signals we choose to see. And you're
totally.
exactly right. If I see everybody on their video off, I'm going to build a wall around that puppy real quick,
Yep.
because
So it almost
I'm
means
I'm
we need to work harder,
internalizing
right?
it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we really need to work harder to make sure that
yeah,
we are doing the right things to all of the things we're working on before. It's almost like we need to work that little bit harder now that we have
yeah.
this
But
new
the
format.
self-aware CEO would say to the board members, everybody get on video. I need to see you guys.
Yeah.
This is difficult enough already, right? Because I know myself, and I know that this is not going to, it's already difficult having you all guys on Zoom. But talking to 6 blank, emojis is not working for me. But
And that's the
that,
thing. You don't get that choice in the office anyway. You don't get the choice to
no,
say, I'm not really going to come into the meeting this time. If you're there physically, you're there physically. And I think that that's why it is so important that you don't use the excuse of that it is just easier. It kind of comes back to my earlier point about things getting grayed out, blended, or
but
mixed
Tim,
together.
you're in a meeting, and you got 8 people in the meeting, and 2 of them are checked out. So do you break the wall down and say, hey, listen, I haven't heard a damn thing, or why are you checked out, right? Or do you build a wall and say, I'm going to get the most I can out of the other 6, and I'll deal with this later? You know, Same thing, different medium,
Totally.
different
Totally.
medium. But it takes a very small trigger for us to put our walls back up. And this is why self-awareness is, I talk to myself in meetings. I'm observing. I'm like, their styles coming out. They're
Yeah.
retrenching. Why is that? What am I going to do about it? I'm trying to lead an orchestra here, and if my fiddle is out of tune, I got to tune them up.
Yeah.
That's
Totally.
my obligation, and I got to do it in the way that I can connect, and that doesn't happen immediately. It's all the groundwork that was laid before, the relationship, the trust building, that allows me in the meeting to say, Karen, you're checked out, and this is an important discussion. And for Karen not to get all offended by that, but to say, snap back in. And
Totally.
that's, that's, and if we're not sincere in our day-to-day relationships, then when it's crunch time, whether that crunch time is a meeting or a crisis, we can't expect the best out of people, because we haven't invested in it.
So people at home can probably tell that we could talk all day long, which is something that we obviously do enjoy with the calls we have, because I feel like there's just so much value you can get out of that. As you said, particularly if you're being vulnerable and just really opening up the realms of possibility. From everything that we've talked about, and if we can sum it all up, we've talked about vulnerability, walls, bringing yourself, being present. What do you think the future of work will hold after this crisis has abated that we're in now? Will it be strengthening everything that we've just talked about now? Obviously, I think that these remain the fundamental basics of how you create and foster relationships with people. But what do you think may change in the future as a result of what we're going through now?
I think, look, I think the foundation stays the same. I think you have to create high performing teams that can respond to situations. And in this particular one, it's a really big one. So I think our priority needs to be, as leaders, is to tap in to the qualitative and the quantitative in our people and in our teams to get the best out of them. And it takes a lot of work, and it starts with us. And I think what we're finding, the reality of this world is this won't be the last time this happens. I think that this idea, the markets, business, we as individuals tend to ignore black swan events. We say, oh, they're once in 100 years. Guess what? 100-year floods aren't happening every 100 years. They're happening every 5 years or whatever, right? Black swan events are happening. This is the biggest one. And we have to figure out how we create resiliency and redundancy in ways that we haven't had to think about before. And I think it starts at the government level, it's the business level, it's the personal level. We have just got to be much more aware that terrible things are going to happen. You in the logistics business, you've had 3 of the major logistics companies now been cyber hacked. This was never an issue before. How do you deal with that? How do we create resilience in our teams, in our people, and in ourselves? And this is, I think, the thing that will change is look at, I don't know if you've seen this, but maybe it's the world that I live in, but corporates are reaching out to me and to my partner, Molly, that, we're doing this podcast, right? And she's a yoga and meditator. She teaches the, special forces resilience through control of through self-awareness and yoga and meditation. Special forces people, she teaches Wall Street people that are coming to us, businesses that are saying, we need product to make us more resilient. We need product to bring us together. And it's this crisis, right? And it's the physical distancing and everything else. So I think the thing that I think is going to happen is we're going to see an acceleration of resilience tools. The E component of our DNA has to be much stronger, so that we don't, because guess what? The really big stuff, it hurts people. What they're at work and they're worried about their family. They're at home and they're worried about their jobs. And we're just not prepared for that, and we have to really step back and think about how do we create resilience in ourselves? How do we create our organization that allows us to deal better with this and remain strong? Because all those things we talked about before, Tim, that all this stuff coming at us and having to put blinders, it's our definition of resilience, and it's not inclusive, it's not participative, and it's not healthy for us. And so I think the ability to sort of slow down and find resilience in ourselves and in each other is going to be really important.
Powerful point to finish off on. Hans, I've very much enjoyed the conversation.
Me
so
too.
Hans Hickler,
Me too.
thank you for your time.
You're a rock star. Thank you.
Thank you.